Mike's on Mike, a conversation about politics, government, and Jacksonville, with 50-year opinion leaders Mike Hightower, Mike Tolbert, and award-winning broadcaster and longtime political observer, Mike Miller.
Welcome to another episode of Mike's on Mike. I'm Mike Miller. I'm here in studio today, but my colleagues, Mike Hightower and Mike Tolbert, are both in their respective out-of-state. Oh, well, Tolbert's not really out-of-state, but it seems like it if you ever have to drive there. But nevertheless, they're at their locations, and I'm here at mine. We have no guest today. It's going to be just the three of us talking about some of the issues of the day. But we thought we would kind of bring the final chapter of JEA and talk about the Aaron Zahn issue and the, of course, 4 years of prison that he has now been sentenced to. One of the questions we want to talk about here today is what role, if any, did Mayor Lenny Curry play in this entire fiasco? And with that, Mr. Tolbert, kick it off for us.
Well, you know, Mike, it does seem like it's been a slow-moving train wreck. This first started in 2017. And I think the first public knowledge of it, or hint of it, was when Curry all of a sudden abruptly removed all the members of the JEA board and then put his own buddies on there, headed by Tom Petway, a big Curry donor, a big Republican donor, and a community icon. And Petway immediately became chair of the board and then was served for a year. And then a year after after his first year, he did a mic drop. He resigned at a meeting and announced that he thought that the JEA should explore the sale explore selling itself. So that took 1 year. Mayor Curry then put an unknown guy named Aaron Zahn on the board to replace Petway. Zahn stayed on the board just a little bit, but once Paul McElroy was run off by the mayor, then Zahn resigned from the board. They decided he wanted to, and then applied for interim CEO of the JEA, and the board made him interim CEO, and then later the council made him the CEO of the JEA. You know, Mike Hightower, thinking about this, I can't imagine what it was like for you to be a top executive at JEA during all this. You were their senior vice president of governmental affairs. You were very close to Paul McElroy and one of his top people. And to watch all this and see what was going on, it had to be hell on wheels for you.
Well, that's putting it mildly, and let me put that in context. If y'all remember correctly, I spent 16 years as a board member and 4 of those years as a chair. And then when I retired from Blue Cross Blue Shield, came back to JEA, as you just said, as head of government relations. So I was there when the mayor was putting pressure, and basically, let's call it spade a spade. Curry ran Paul McElroy off. I mean, he was, they just put a lot of pressure on him. And then all of a sudden, Paul comes back from a meeting with the mayor and said, guys, I'm going to retire. And he didn't ever said it. It was real clear what happened. And so to put this in context to show you what happened was they made Melissa Dykes the interim. So, and Zahn was on the board, if you remember correctly. So that was a Friday. So on Friday of April 13th, Zahn resigns on a Friday afternoon at 5 o'clock. He resigns from the board April 13th. On April 17th, the following Tuesday, the board comes together and moves Melissa off as interim CEO and unanimously puts Zahn on. And then it started from there. And as you said, from that point on, it just, it was picking up on what Tom Petway said. Zahn made it real clear that they wanted to sell JEA. There were some of us on senior staff that didn't agree with it, didn't think it was going to happen. There's at least 2 of us that raised the issue that kept saying, I don't think this is going to pass. Candidly, he told me that the mayor told him he said not to worry, the mayor's got the 10 votes. I mean, that is a quote which I gave to the law enforcement, the FBI, and all that. It was not good. Paul McElroy was an incredible professional. Everyone liked him. And it started downhill from there. We'll get into some of the folks that I think were complicit. It starts at City Hall all the way through it. The one thing that I want to remind everybody that's brought in to underscore your point, Mike, when they kept saying, how was this happening? During the last few weeks that I was there, when I and a couple other folks said, I don't think this is going to happen, Zahn used to brag that he had a badge and would wear it that got him into the back door of City Hall and brag that he had been into City Hall during this time over 200 times. I left on June 10th, which was a Monday, and on Tuesday, June 11th, the remaining senior staff, Zahn, and the new consultants that were hired for government relations went off-site to talk about top plan. It was, after that, let me
put some more context around this, Mike Hightower. People need to also remember back then, Curry controlled a great majority of the city council members. So when he told Zahn he had the votes, there was no question about it. I mean, he had Tim Baker, his consultant. They controlled city council. There were a lot of city council members that sat there like deaf, dumb, and blind while this was going on. They complicit in some ways, I think.
Yes. So it was. When you talk about complicit, that's the main word throughout this whole thing. City council, the board that he put in, that the mayor put in place, the senior staff that stayed there, that went behind closed doors on that Tuesday, June 11th, and then the lawyers and the consultants that they hired in town to help pull off it. They were all complicit. Those are the ones, as I talk about, that slipped the hook.
The public relations PR campaign for selling JEA really picked up steam back in 2019 when Zahn started telling board members that the sky was falling and that there would have to be a 29% cut in the workforce and a 26% increase in rates for the utility if they were to, quote, survive. The death spiral, I believe, is the term that was used for it at the time. Then that summer, while protesting that he had no plans, was not involved in the sale of JEA, Mayor Curry at the time said he would use the sale proceeds to pay off bond debt and invest what was left. So it certainly sounds to me like while he knew nothing about this, he was already planning on how he was going to spend the dollars that they were going to end up getting for the sale of JEA. Why do you think Curry was not part of this, at least legally? Why wasn't he indicted? And what do you think will be his legacy as a result of this? And you guys can go ahead and start, Mr. Hightower.
I think there's a couple questions, and I got to divide them. There is no way possible that Zahn would have proceeded with this if Curry was not aware of it.
Can I interrupt? Mike, can I interrupt you just for a question? In that, would you say that Petway also had talked perhaps to Curry prior to him dropping the mic and leaving the JEA board so that this whole plan would be executed in a way that would get to what they hope to be the final result?
That I don't know. You know what? I don't know. Yeah, it probably. Yeah. It probably, because when he said we should consider it, Paul McElroy was the executive director. In all those years that I was on the board, I never heard Paul talk about that. And when I was brought on board, when Petway dropped the mic, Paul had never mentioned that to me, and I was part of his seniors team. So that came out of the blue. So I think Mike is probably right on that. Curry had to be a part of it. Zahn would not have gone one step without checking with Curry. Curry had put him on the board, and like I said, it was Curry's board that when Zahn resigned from the board on Friday, and the board makes him unanimously on Tuesday, the interim CEO, there's no way that Curry was not a part of all this.
You know, we'll probably never know why he didn't get indicted or whatever. But there are some things we do know, and some of it is, you know, he double talked, he obfuscated, and he stressed the truth. He outright lied. The JEA investigative report done by Steve Busey for the city council, really, if you go back and look at that, it made it very clear that Curry and his administration were involved from the very get-go. Wouldn't have happened at all without Curry. And one year after investigating this thing for the city council, the report was released by the city council in January of 2021, taking a year, reviewing 600,000 documents, as I recall, and interviewing dozens of witnesses. And when it was released, if you remember, it put a bullseye right on the mayor.
Yeah, and let me remind everybody what happened. Busey did the report. Members of the city council were on that special report. And if you remember, Mike Tolbert, one of the things that was so exasperating about that was that when the report came back to the city council, just to show how complicit everybody was involved, they never discussed it, guys. They never discussed it. All they did was there was a motion that the Steve Busey report should be made a part of the record. It was passed unanimously, and nothing was ever talked about. And yep. If you remember, and at that point, a lot of us, we'll be talking about this shortly, about Our Jax, we just said, this is an inside deal. It's totally bait. But all that went in there, and I can just remember it bringing it up, never talked about it, all the documents, all the good work that Steve Busey and the committee did, nothing. It just made part of the record.
Well, you know, as for Curry's legacy, I'm sure there are places in Jacksonville where he can go and people will still think he was a good mayor. But I'm old enough to remember when Hayden Burns was the mayor and the legacy he left. And in my humble opinion, I think Curry is perhaps the least respected mayor of Jacksonville since Hayden Burns. And I think that's part of his legacy.
Well, and I think also Mike, is to underscore that when you go back to the Hayden Burns thing, most of those records and the newspaper articles aren't there anymore. But now all you got to do is Google JEA or Lenny Curry. And I'm not sure anything's going to pop up good about Lenny Curry, except that he put Zahn on, he put a board together. He was part of that deal, and then he pulled the plug when there was an outcry. His legacy will always be he tried to sell JEA and it didn't work out. That's his legacy. Doesn't matter what he tries to explain it. That's his legacy. 8 years. That's his legacy.
The both of you were members of Our Jax. I think a lot of people watching or listening probably remember Our Jax because of the Lot J sale, which you were basically spearheading the opposition to that. I didn't realize what role Our Jax played with the JEA sale. Can you go through that a little bit? What did you guys do for that, and how did that come about?
Mr. Tolbert, this is Mr. Tolbert's story. I love listening to it. I'll add to it, but he's got it down.
Well, if you go back and remember, there were a lot of people who were concerned about the sale in the community, but we were mostly talking amongst ourselves. Jake was about the only one publicly raising hell about it. And I remember him saying to me one day, why am I out here on this limb by myself? Where are the rest of the people who should be standing up and raising hell about this? And so one day I get a call to come to a meeting at Randy DeFore's Fidelity office about this JEA. And I didn't know what it was about. I mean, what was going on. This was in November of 2019, I think, Hightower.
Absolutely.
And so I go to the meeting, And there's people like Michael Ward in there, and David Miller, and Mike Hightower, and Audrey Moran, and Sherry McGill. I mean, just around the table, Bobby Stein. And I'm thinking, what the hell am I doing here? Well, the train was moving so fast. This is November now, at 2019. There was a plan to have a council vote in January, just a couple of months later, to put a referendum on the ballot to approve the sale of the JEA. And so I learned that we were there to start talking about putting together a campaign to oppose that. Over a period of time, we gained momentum. Things started happening, and so the referendum got backed away from. So we weren't putting on an election. We were now trying to stop the sale of the JEA. And I remember one of the things I remember, Hightower, toward the end of that meeting, I just sat there and listened in awe. And toward the end of the meeting, I raised my hand, and I said, Mayor Godbold is about to send in another guest column on the sale of the JEA to the Times-Union. It would really be stronger and nice if there could be a full-page ad. And so Michael Ward immediately said, I'll pay for it. And it was a pretty damn strong ad, to be honest. It got a lot of attention. And
it was
I remember when we were putting the ad together, I called Mike Ward and I said, I'm going to send you a copy of the ad so you can approve it. And he said, you think I'm going to approve anything or change anything that Jake Godbold wants to do? So I don't know if he felt the same way after the ad, but it was that happened sort of like boom, boom. The ad came out, got a lot of press on the ad. It's not just being in the newspaper. It made headlines, and was on the news, television news.
And statewide,
right after,
they paid.
Yeah,
statewide.
But right after that was that next day, I think, was that city council special committee meeting, the city council that Michael Boland chaired, and Jake and Mike Ward both were there, and that's what Jake told Boland he was going to talk as long as he wanted to. He'd been sitting on his ass for a long time. He wasn't coming back. If y'all remember that.
Came out on his walker. Remember that.
But yeah, we picked up momentum, and you're right, Mike Miller. That once it was determined we weren't going to sell the JEA, there was a move. There was conversation about disbanding Our Jax. We had done our job,
right.
But then all of a sudden, Lot J started sticking its head up, and so we used what I guess credibility we had gained.
I would say star power. I would call it star power more than I would have, to be honest. You had some pretty influential and very, very, very well-known people on that group.
No question. I wondered what the hell I was doing there.
No, it was we all brought something as a team. It was a great team effort. It was, what did you think about it? It was an incredible team. Yeah. And the thing is we were just doing what we thought was right. Going back to what Ed Austin said, you're never wrong if you do the right thing for the right reason. Period.
Good point. There were some good guys and heroes in all of this as well, and we really shouldn't forget them because we don't want to paint a picture that says that everybody was a villain in this deceitful program. So let's name a few of those people who you guys felt specifically were really wearing the white hats on this one.
Well, I would suspect Mike Hightower and I will probably agree on most of these. I made a little list, and of course it starts with my friend Jake Godbold. It includes Council President Scott Wilson, who was really strong. I mean, that if it hadn't been for Scott, I don't know if we might not have stole the JEA. There was Carla Miller, whose legacy will forever be defined about what she did in Atlanta.
For people who don't recall, by the way, Carla was our ethics officer here in the city.
The city's ethics officer. Then you had Kyle Billy, the auditor, the council auditor, who's the first one that unveiled the PUP plan to give those guys millions of bonus dollars. There were some members of the city council. Not all of them were under the control of Curry and complicit. Randy DeFore obviously was not. Matt Carlucci and Garrett Dennis, and Brenda Priestley Jackson. There were others who were strong and stood up. But of course, you had Our Jax, the members of Our Jax. And then you kind of...
Just to replace that, as Sherry McGill, Audrey Moran, David Miller, Michael Ward, Tolbert, myself. But the other thing is there was the attorney that represented the lineman, and there was a representative from the lineman. It was just an incredible group it was wrong what was going on. And the other thing was we just kept going back, and I keep going back to what Mike Tolbert said when we started getting names and we had a website. He said, you can't over communicate with the public. And that was the driving thing, that we got to reach out and get more folks involved. And that was one of the things that Mike talks about why he was there. Mike brought some skills to it, and when you throw the reputation of those people I just talked about, and the fact was that we were doing it, we thought for the right reason, because we thought what was going on was wrong. There was a lack of transparency, and we just kind of felt like it was being run by a group of people that were self-serving, and it was going to be bad for the city. And that's what drove us.
Let me finish.
There were a few others too, Mike. Tolbert, there were a few others too, including some of my former colleagues in the media.
You got Nate Monroe and Chris Hong and
absolutely.
Dave, who were all over it, and other members of the media. One of my favorites was my friend Pete Carpenter, who was a retired CEO of CSX. Right after Zahn was hired, Pete went crazy about it. And he called me and he said, I want to write a letter to the editor. Will you help me? And I said, Pete, if you write it, it's going to be more than a letter to the editor. It's going to be a guest column. But I'll be happy to write it for you. And one of the things he insisted on saying was that this guy Zahn was nothing but a snake oil salesman. And that was the bottom line of that column. And boy, did he call it right. Then you got the federal prosecutors who's got the ball rolling and kept it rolling and got the conviction. And then finally you got Judge Davis. And Hightower, I want to know what went through your head when you heard the verdict that Judge Davis handed down, given your experiences.
The first thought was, thank God, finally. It was finally. And then my second thought was all the ones who we have talked about that were complicit or knew what was going on or were getting some sort of contract or something out of it, the ones that had slipped the foot. And then I thought about the 3 or 4 who got a good lawyer, probably turned state's or federal witness, got off the deal altogether. And then, but it was finally this nightmare was over. And I think one of the things, Mike, that we talked about when we first started out and when we were talking with the folks that represented the JEA was that when you think of the JEA, it's been around for almost 125 years. It's got great, dedicated, committed people. In the linemen alone, there are 3 generations of linemen there. By the way, we now have a woman lineman, so we have a female lineman finally. But there are 3 generations of linemen right there. It's a family.
But one thing I wanted to say is, and I want to take it from a Mark Woods column that recently ran, and this is a quote from the column. As Assistant U.S. Attorney A. Dyson Duvas said, the crime wasn't the attempting sale. It was the effort to fleece the city of Jacksonville. Duvas summed it up, that has been reported and investigated and deliberated in the last 5 years, by saying that the former CEO came up with a bonus plan. That's the PUP plan. We really haven't talked much about that today, but the PUP plan. And he said he tried to hide it, Zahn, but he got caught. And that really kind of put it all in a circle. It looks like we've lost Hightower here, Mike, but let's move on if we can, and hopefully he'll come back in talking about good guys. And I think we just had an incredible opportunity last week to be able to sit down with Mayor Donna Deegan and talk with her about her first year. And we primarily discussed, for people who haven't seen the show, primarily talked about the $1.9 billion budget. I had some takeaways. I want to hear yours too, Tolbert. Let me start off, if I may, by starting with what she said was her whole role and how she saw herself as the mayor. And she said, changing the culture in City Hall, and made a very important point by saying that people desperately want to be a part of this city government, but they have felt like they didn't have a voice. And she wanted to become the voice of the people for city government, which I think was very poignant for her to say that. She also, by the way, and you may recall this, quoted Tampa Mayor Bob Buckhorn, who she admires greatly and is a good friend, by saying that as far as running for office, the best storyteller wins. And Mike Tolbert, you personify that as a storyteller for yourself as well as for candidates that you've worked for, and helping them form their message and be successful in forming that message. The last thing that she said that I wanted to quote here was, if we can't be a healthful city, we can't be a successful city. And I thought that was so very important as she was talking about healthcare in the city. Mike, what about your thoughts?
Well, I have several. One of them is going to sound kind of self-serving, but in a lot of ways, to me, she has channeled Jake Godbold. She made it very clear that she does not like inaction. She likes to get things done. I recall right after we got to her office, Mike Hightower and I came together, and we were running a little behind. But on the way there, I told Hightower, I said, don't worry about it, because I've never known a mayor to be on time. And then I looked at him and I said, well, I'm not sure about Donna, because she's been in the news business, and she's been on deadline all her life. So but we got there. We weren't late. We were early. But we got there, and she was in her office waiting on us and wanting to talk and before we did anything. I told her that story, and she smiled, and she said, I tell people the 11 o'clock news never starts at 11:01. And she has impressed me as someone who, like Jake, when there was an issue or a problem that needed to be solved, would put all the players in the room together. And the deal was, we're not leaving until we get this done. I don't care what you got coming up or what you think you need to be done. Until we get this solved, we're going to stay right here and make it happen. And I think she's an action-oriented kind of an individual. I really do.
Yeah, I think so too. And she seems very pleased with her first year, and I think she looks very optimistic as far as moving forward. And you're right, she should be. It was audacious, as it was quoted. An audacious first year. Well, we're gonna wrap things up a little early because we've lost Mr. Hightower, but we don't want to wrap up this show without mentioning and paying tribute to two great citizens that we've lost here in the last couple of weeks. First one was Al Kennard. I knew Al Kennard when I was working for the Jacksonville Economic Development Commission before I joined the Delaney administration back in the year 2000, and became pretty close with Big Al. I liked him a lot. He seemed to like me a lot. But boy, I'll tell you, there was nothing that anyone could ask of him that he wasn't ready to jump in with both feet. He would move mountains for anybody that he liked, and anybody that he thought would be good for the city of Jacksonville. And that's really the impression I got from Al. You guys knew him a lot longer than I did, of course.
Well, Al's reputation was he didn't know, he would not say no if something couldn't be done. And I get a lot of credit for things that Jake and I did together. But I got to tell you, Kennard was there making it happen for me, especially, and for Jake. He was the go-to guy. I remember the first time I met Al was when I came to Jacksonville in '69 as a reporter for the Times-Union covering City Hall. And Al was in Streets and Highways. He wasn't a department head, and I don't even know if he was a division chief. But I found out very quickly that when city council members had an issue in their district, particularly had a pothole or a water drain, or main bust or something, they went directly to Al Kennard who didn't have a lot of authority, but Al he got it all fixed. Well, in doing that, Al was getting the chits for himself, and Mayor Tansley wasn't, you know. And so when I went on Tansley's staff a few years later, I tried to explain to the hands, you know, let Al keep doing his thing, but make sure those council members know that he's doing it because you want him to do it, you know. But Al served 5 mayors, I think almost 6 decades, and I've known some really good public servants, but I've never known anybody like Al Kennard, and his ever-present cigar.
Another great leader that we lost here recently was David Stein. Most people in the community probably know David because he was the man to introduce Burger King to the city of Jacksonville. He had the original franchise with that company. Pardon me? Would you say, Mike Tolbert? The Nation. I am sorry. You're right. I can tell you that in the Jewish community, he's probably best known for being the founder of the Jacksonville Community Alliance, the JCA. And I got a very nice note from Adam Chaskin, who you may recall was on our program as part of the organization Together Without Hate that we did here on Mike's on Mike. But he wrote out and said that the JCA stands as a testament of David's commitment to fostering unity, cultural enrichment, and support within the community. Without this bold vision, our beloved JCA would not be what it is today. Those doors opened in 1988, and they continue open, and they're bigger and better than they ever were before. And really, we have lost 2 great icons in this community in the last couple of weeks with Al Kennard and David Stein. And we wish them well. And as we say in our community, may their memories be a blessing. Gentlemen, we're out of time. It's been a great half hour. Thank you very much. I miss you both. It's always more fun when we're all together in the same studio. That way we can kick each other under the table. But just pretend like this is a kick to both of you guys. And thank you very much for joining us. And thank you for joining us. The Mike's on Mike program brought to you by the Jacksonville History Center and the fine donors who keep the cameras rolling and the lights on. Thanks for joining us, and we'll see you again next week.
Mike's on Mike with Mike Tolbert, Mike Hightower, and Mike Miller can be found on your favorite podcasting platform, Facebook, and YouTube. Visit the website at mikesonmike.com. Join us next time for more conversation with Mike's on Mike.